Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today what we're going to discuss is a late arm, what it is, why it matters from both a health and performance perspective, and then how we go about fixing it. All right, so first, let's kind of define what a late arm is. So essentially what we're looking at is at foot strike, where is the arm relative to the ground, right? So essentially what we're looking for, kind of the research kind of says that we should be somewhere between 45 and 90 degrees, all right? And there's a few different papers kind of suggesting that different points in that range are kind of more or less optimal. We've seen ones related to kind of Korean versus American pitchers. The American pitchers threw a little bit harder, we're closer to 45. The Korean pitchers threw a little bit slower, we're closer to 70. But generally speaking, that's kind of the range that we're working with, where we would say, hey, it's probably okay somewhere in that range. But if we get the foot strike and we're anywhere, kind of below 45 degrees, so parallel or even here, we've got a real issue for a few different reasons, all right? And so I think kind of the first place people go is immediately like, oh, that's a red flag for an injury. And like, yes, we're likely increasing injury risk, but injury is never just one thing, right? It's multifactorial in nature, always. And so when we look at it from this perspective, yes, we should probably clean this up, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So we're gonna dive in to kind of both kind of the health and performance aspects of this. So from a health perspective, we have a couple of things kind of going on when we're looking at this. So if we're landing, kind of here or somewhere like that, as we get to foot strike, a couple of things are going to start happening. So one is either we're not going to make it to a flipped up point in enough time that we're going to be able to get laid back to the same point that we would be to be able to kind of apply enough force to the baseball to throw, kind of meaningfully hard. So that's the performance side of it. It's likely a limiter in that regard, and we're going to kind of come back to that. From a health side, we have a couple of things going on. So, we've got essentially this kind of like anterior tilt going on at the scapula, all right? And we know we need to get posteriorly tilted if we're going to meaningfully lay that back. It all kind of has to work together. So we're going to go from that point, kind of really crank up there to get to that point. The other thing we know that's going to happen is if we get to the correct positions, we are going to kind of spike that loading rate. And so essentially what that means is a lot more stress is going to go to the arm, and we've seen really a lot go to that medial elbow region as well. And so that's kind of where this health thing becomes more of an issue from that standpoint. All right, so kind of continuing on from there, the other thing that we're likely to see is if we're here at foot strike and that torso is relatively closed, once that torso begins to open, we're not flipping that arm up until that torso is mostly open. So we would flag that anyway, even if at foot strike we landed here, right? Relative to the torso, relative to the kind of the arm action, that torso is open, and vice versa. And so we've also kind of seen there are some papers kind of showing that the torso opening early into foot strike can also increase the stress that's kind of happening at the medial elbow, anterior shoulder kind of region. So again, we've got kind of some health aspects happening there. Obviously, from a performance standpoint, if we're here and we're not getting that meaningful stretch across that whole shoulder complex, that pec and everything here, where we can load this and kind of pull from this really deep position, right? Kind of the impulse side that we've talked about before, where we can kind of increase kind of essentially the range of motion that we're going through, kind of up that the impulse from that length perspective. We're not going to get the most out of this on the velocity side. So that's kind of an important piece here on the performance side as well, right? Because if we're not on time, we're not going to load through the torso in the same way, transfer it efficiently into the arm, and then lay it back to the same degree, right? That layback is likely to be restricted. We already talked about trying to get from that anterior tilt all the way back to that posterior tilt in that really, really limited time window that we have. We're likely to restrict that, and we do know that layback is one of those pieces that's also kind of highly correlated with ball velocity, right? Seeing that the higher velocity guys tend to be closer to 180, lower velocity guys closer to 160 or 165. So that's not a gigantic difference, right? So what we're kind of looking for as that arm is kind of flipped up is we're going to be kind of receiving, accepting, kind of transferring a lot of energy that's been built up through the body into that shoulder complex, through the arm, and into the ball. So we want to be set up in a position where we can really handle that and let that energy flow through. And if we're late, that's just not going to happen in a meaningful way. We're going to place more stress on the connective tissue with that kind of higher velocity, these super high forces that are going through the arm already. And again, we're likely to kind of impact that injury risk in a negative way. So why is this happening? So we'll start general and get more specific. So kind of first would be mobility. So if we've got any restrictions going on, whether it's at like the pec minor, for example, that can drive a little bit more anterior tilt of the scapula as kind of a resting position if those fibers are shortened. If we've got anything going on at the pec otherwise, the posterior shoulder, anything that's going to keep us from reaching these kind of more extreme ranges of motion cleanly, we may need to do some work there, and that can be done a variety of ways beyond the scope of this, but that would be one place to look. So the next two are mechanical. So there's kind of a couple of main ones that we generally see. So one is a super pronated handbrake, and that's going to generally also kind of coincide with a really vertically oriented, kind of arm swing, if you can even call it that, elbow hike. And so we're not going to get that kind of spiraling action up that like staircase, if you can kind of visualize it that way. The elbow spiral, as it's kind of been popularized. That's going to be one that tends to go with it. So overly pronated, very vertical with that. The second one will be this really, really big arm swing that's way behind the midline of your body. It's going to take a lot of time to be on time. Generally, we're going to get this big swing and big counter rotation from the torso as well. A bunch of stuff's going to be off time. That's likely to kind of throw that off as well. And then, kind of two that tend to go together would be one, the torso kind of leaking forward before the lower body. Right? We're going to be off time in terms of that. Generally, we're not going to be able to segment the pelvis and torso. And then kind of along those same lines, the pushing of that back leg, right? We're going to cash out that range of motion. We're not going to be able to kind of separately rotate the pelvis versus the torso. It's all going to go at once, all right? And we're not likely to get that arm kind of up on time when we're doing those things as well, or it can be an issue there. All right, so how do we go about kind of changing these things? So let's talk about some of the things we may use. So anytime we're talking about patterning changes, you've kind of heard me say this before, overload implements are going to be our friend, right? As it is when we're learning a new skill, we want to go slower, right? Heavier stuff is going to make us do that. So that's one thing. It also gives us kind of this really intense proprioceptive feedback where we can feel where we're at in space. Generally, if you're screwing something up with a pretty heavy implement, it's not going to feel very good. We're going to notice it right away. We're going to be like, okay, I screwed that up. How do I do that differently on the next one? It's going to give us that more immediate feedback. So when we're talking about how do we generally attack this, there's a couple ways. So we may go after some of those tissue things first. So we may kind of have some directed work at the pec minor, at the posterior shoulder, at the subclavius, some of that stuff kind of around that shoulder complex. We'll want to attack that. And then we'll likely have some mobility work that goes along with that, whether it's end range, isometrics, things along those lines. So that would be the first thing, the really general side to address. We definitely want to do that. On the mechanical side, then how do we go about getting this feel? So overload stuff, like we talked about, can be a really good option. So generally we'll start from a more constrained action. So we'll start with the arm, basically where we want it. So we'll go closer to 90 because we're going to go the extreme other way if they're struggling here. We're going to get them more vertical and kind of give them a feel for what that other option feels like. And so we may do some feel work with a bell club. All right, those can be a really good option to kind of pair with the next throw. And then generally we'll begin with either some kind of constrained 10-toe with an overload ball. Generally, we're going to go 14 ounces or heavier. And then we may go split stance or something like that if that's a better option for some guys. But we're going to go some kind of stationary constrained arm action drill to begin with an overload implement. That's where we're generally going to start. Then from there, we may begin to introduce the arm swing a little bit, but we're generally going to do it in a bit more kind of rhythmic and passive way. We want to feel kind of that loose energy from the downswing that's happening to just passively kind of flip guys up. And so these may be some dead arm swings or things to start with that. That can be a good option as a field drill to start. We may go figure 8 10 toes next, something really simple to kind of get that arm swing happening. From there, we'll likely introduce pelvic rotation, so it may be some kind of rocker with a swing, things like that. And then the kind of final piece to this, and the way that I really like to kind of go about this when we're putting it all together, is how do we go from a larger range of motion to really feel that aggressive downswing, that momentum from the downswing, and carry that right into flip up. We'll generally go an overhead move. We may go like a really big figure 8 to feel that come through, but we want to add some velocity to the system there to kind of feel that into flip up. So these are just a couple options when we talk about kind of how to go about kind of changing a late arm action. If you're struggling with this, feel free to give it a try. If you got any questions, feel free to comment below. If you're interested in learning more about our training, feel free to reach out via email. Thanks.